Hey guys, Chris Dunn here, aka the Boogie Man. In this episode of Boogie Tech, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. First thing we're going to talk about is this badass 29 Ford Roadster that a friend of mine owns. He brung it to me because the steering in this car, something wasn't right, and it was getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and they've tried doing some things to it to try to get it to correct, and it's not. It's getting very dangerous to drive. And this is actually his wife's car. They bought it for her. She enjoys driving it, so we're going to get it safe for her. Here's the problem. We went through this thing and we have analyzed the problems with this car. And I hope whoever built this car, we're not shooting at you. Well, yeah, we are. We are talking shit about you because you did a piss poor job on a lot of things that you've done. And I'm not trying to be mean. It just is what it is. There's a lot of do nots on this car, all right? Number one, it ain't the guy that bought the car's fault. He didn't know, because a lot of the stuff's hid behind hubs that you don't see. Number one, you don't do on no hot rod. These steering arms right here are threaded, but you don't put lock washers on the bolts, because when you're twisting the front ends, trying to steer this, doing this right here, and them tires are twisting on the ground, and then them arms are tweaking, guess what you do? You tweak the lock washer out. You flex it, it breaks, all right? It don't stay tight. You don't use lock washers for that. You Loctite it, torque it to the spec of the bolt, and you're fine. You don't do, that's 101, you never do. That's the first problem with this car. That's one reason the steering has been getting worse and worse and worse. Number two, the steering arm right here is not being clearanced around the kingpin bearing bush in here. So every time it touches, it's rubbing. Well, you got to, when you're building these hot rods, you got to mock all this up. Look at it. Make sure it's right before you paint it and assemble it. This is bad wrong. So it's bound up. So now the steering's so hard to steer because it's actually bound up on itself. Number three, they had the caster off so bad on this car, they had the kingpin sitting straight up. Now, if y'all go back to our gasser episode, it's the same thing, people. Whether this thing's a gasser or this thing's a 29 Roadster, you got to have camber in the axle. Well, before it come to me, my friend and another friend of mine, they fixed the caster problem by lowering the wishbone arm here to try to get some caster laid back into it. But what you do when you build these cars, you can cut them or you buy this wishbone that the caster's put into already. They make a wishbone that looks like this in the bolting surface here. It's got a kick in it. Well, the kick's for caster. It lays that axle back. We've had three problems right now that have compounded. Now why does it steer like crap going down the road? Wanders all over the road. It's very dangerous. And this ain't even that heavy of a car. So it goes back to people building hot rods, and I'm just going to be honest with you, that don't care. Because let me tell you what, I built hot rods for a long time. I don't build hot rods for a living no more. I do this channel because I enjoy doing this channel, and I love hot rods. It's just not how I make my living. I work on some on the side. When I built a hot rod, I triple checked everything I'd done, especially in handling and steering. Do you know why? I didn't want to be kept up night knowing I killed somebody. I killed their kid. I killed their wife. I killed their mama, because I did such a shitty, piss poor job of putting these automobiles together that I killed somebody. So think about that. Anytime you're building a hot rod for an individual, even yourself, think about, did I check to make sure I had that steering component right? If I went through the whole checklist to make sure I have did everything like I needed to do, because would I put my kid in that car? Would I put my mama in that car and drive it? Everybody needs to think about that. So remember something. When you build any hot rod for yourself or for somebody else, man, just think about it. You know, if you wouldn't put your family in it, don't put somebody else's in it. Okay, guys, I'm off that tangent. Now let's talk about what we're going to do to fix this front end. First off, we're going to remove the tie rod. We're going to remove the steering arms. We're going to move all that to the rear. Basically take this loose, bolt it back up, not using lock washers. By Loctiting and torquing it, we're going to move the tie rod to the rear, and we're going to rear steer it to get the accurement right, because accurement is all over the page on this. In fact, we're going to go to the whiteboard here in just a few minutes and talk about accurement. Once we move this steering to the rear, we're going to have a problem. Now our tie rod is going to hit our wishbone. So what we're going to have to do is actually cope the wishbone out a little bit to give the steering rod room, or the tie rod room, to clear it. We're going to show you that in the next episode of Getting Everything Ready. We're just talking about things we're going to fix. These shocks are rubbing on the front. We got to space them out. We got shocks bound up into the rear and actually are bent and collapsed. We're going to show you that. So we've got to make new shock brackets for the rear also. So it's just not a single one problem, or should I say it's just not one problem with this car, it's multiple problems. And we're going to fix it all while we got it here. We're actually going to build a new set of headers for this car because the tire gets into these little single tube headers. So we're going to build him an all-in-one header. Stay tuned, you're going to love that. All that's going to be in the next episode. But right now we're going to go to the whiteboard and we're going to talk about accurement. And we're going to explain why when you front steer one of these cars, it's so hard to get the accurement right. And we're going to show you how bad this car handles and how bad the accurement is. Okay guys, now we're back over here at the whiteboard and we're going to talk about acumen. All right, that's how it's pronounced, acumen. And what that is, and this is what we're going to explain about how tricky it is to front steer a straight axle car, okay? And this is the reason why. We're going to talk about what not to do and what problems we're having with the 29. They're front steering the car. That means that the tie rod is in front of the axle. Here's the car. Here's the axle, there's the tie rod. The problem with that is when you turn the car, this tire, if you notice, is only turned this much. And the outside tire is turned way too much. That's wrong. That won't work. That tire is trying to drag itself around. That is wrong. It will turn. It will do this. It does all kinds of crazy stuff. Now, this is the way it properly should turn. What I mean by that is, this is a rear steer axle, meaning that here's my straight axle, here's my tie rod, here's my car. We have moved the tie rod to the rear of the axle. This inside tire, which is always the one to the inside of the corner, should always turn more, have more turn angle on it than the outside tire does. Why? Because two circles. The inner circle is smaller than the outer circle. So this tire is going to travel less as this does. So this needs to be turned, the angle of this needs to turn more than the outside tire. I'm trying to make this so simple that I understand it and hope you guys do too. We're going to talk to you about how you are supposed to try to figure this out. If you're rear steering an axle, okay, here's the car, here's our straight axle, here's our tie rod. In theory, this is how you're supposed to do this to make the accurement work out right. Here is the kingpin, here's our rear end, here's the kingpin, and here's our rear end. Pull you an imaginary line or a string from the center of that kingpin to the center of that rear end. You do the same here. Center of the kingpin to the center of the rear end. And wherever this line, you should have, your tie rod should intersect that line. So let's just say if you was out 8 inches with your steering arm, it don't matter if it's 8 inches as long as that intersect point right there, that tie rod has to cross over that line, okay, on both sides. If it's out 6 inches, this would be a little farther close here, but then the tie rod would have to be farther out because the tie rod is supposed to intersect this imaginary line from the kingpin to the rear end. So what that means, if you get this right, that means when you're driving down the road and you go into a corner, the inside tire, let's say if we're turning to the left, this tire's going to turn more than this tire because it's traveling 2 different radiuses of a circle. If I'm turning to the right, then this inside tire is going to turn sharp and this outside tire is not going to turn as sharp. That is accurate. That's what that's all about. What's wrong with the 29? They've got it set up wrong. What I mean by that is they got the tie rod in the front. They have not got the steering arms out far enough because you can't, because it's going to hit the backing plate and it's going to hit the tire. So you cannot have a line. Imagine if your straight line was doing like this, going through here, or imagine this one right here. If you're going through here, you can't get the steering arm out here. That's on the outside of the tire. That's the reason you can't do this, because this line keeps going. Look where it keeps going. It keeps going through the tire. So all you can do is try to get the steering arm as close to the tire as possible. And it just ain't worth doing. The best thing to do is rear steer. But what's wrong with the 29? Now, this inside tire, now when we turn to the left, it hardly turns. It's turning very little, and the outside tire now is turning so many more degrees. So the outside tire is wanting to skip and dig into the ground. It's trying to dig in. Where this tire here is just fighting each other. It does not work. I've tried to make this very simple. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment and we'll do our best to answer it. Like I said, I know my drawings and my stuff is very crude and simple, but I try to make it crude and simple. We're going to walk you through us fixing this car. Be prepared on the next episode. We're going to walk you through working on this car and fixing some of these things. So stay tuned, watch it, and we'll talk after we do some repair work.